Have you ever wondered why Indian and Chinese kids do so well compared to white kids in Western countries? I mean, are they just simply more intelligent genetically? I mean, that doesn't really make much sense. I mean, it was the white guy that ruled over India for like hundreds of years, and the Chinese were, like peasants 50 years ago or so. So, I mean, it doesn't really make sense. I mean, yeah, they could be the case, but I don't buy that argument. I generally think that humans, and I say this sincerely, are humans of all races are roughly of the same intelligence. That's my view. There's no studies that can take out the factor of education, because if you've got a group of very educated people, let's say white people, and then you have a less educated group, let's say brown people, the less educated people will end up being less intelligent. So if you kind of like, for example, now do an intelligence test between a wealthy country and a poor country, you would find that I would have thought you would find that the wealthy country would have more intelligent people because they're more educated. So it's kind of like, I mean, if you look at chess, for example, so I follow chess. Right now, you've got a white guy, Magnus Carlsen, who's the world's #1 by far. Okay, so, right up there, you've got Indians, you've got Chinese, you've got people of every, you've got Russians everywhere. I mean, it really is like, I mean, chess is one of those sports where I think people do well because of national history. Like, so if a country has done well traditionally, that will spur on the next generation. So what you're seeing now in chess is lots of Indians doing well because they've now have a world champion, and I think India is going to dominate that. I mean, you kind of like, you look at that it happens in lots of different sports, even in like squash. When I was growing up, the Pakistanis completely dominated it. Now the Egyptians do, and it kind of happens because now you've got nowadays you've got this series of like young Egyptians thinking, they're kind of aspiring to be like the world champion, whoever that is right now, and they're kind of motivated by that. And so to say that like Egyptians are genetically better at squash, I think would be very short-sighted. So I take the view that no, I mean, Indian kids and Chinese kids are no more intelligent than white kids, and the reason why they do well is because they're of their parents. And I would also say that it's usually the mother driving things. So I think that from the experience that I have, I think you've got for example, you've got the tiger mum, right? A tiger mum for you who don't know. They say that Chinese kids do well because of tiger mums, these really demanding, pushy mums that basically drive their kids to do well. And I think that's across, addressing the Indians who are kind of watching this thinking, yeah, that's an Indian mum as well. And that's true. And that is why they do well. And I put it to you that is why Indians and Chinese do well. Basically, it's their mothers, typically. It could be their father as well, but I think it's typically the mother. Now, in my other videos, I've gone through the amazing academic success that my own kids have had. Homeschool was an idea that I kind of put forward to my wife, but really, and I take most of the credit for it, certainly on an online space. My wife doesn't really want to appear that much on social media, but really it was her mother, kind of like her skills. I mean, we kind of taught equally. If anything, my wife taught a bit more than I did. But basically, I think it was her kind of high standards, her kind of demanding the highest kind of standards from the kids, which was the main reason my kids have done really, really well. Yeah, it's not easy, nice for me to take the credit for it. But I think the reality is it comes down to Isabel, my wife, and I think that is, if I look across my family, it's pretty much the same thing. It's like I think if you look across my family, it's the mothers, and I guess there's some kind of like, bias. I mean, I might be putting into. So if I see a kid who do well, I might unfairly attribute the mother's drive and start, I might get this perception that the mother's kind of driving things, that might be a false perception that I have. But my view is, you basically look across my family, basically where the mothers have been driving things, and really demanding, the kids have done really well. And that goes with my own mother. So my brother has a degree, has a PhD from the LSE, did very well academically. My sister has a master's from Oxford. We've all done, three of us, and we've all done really well. And really, I think my mother was the reason. It's not our intelligence, right? So you're going to say, hey, it's all about, my mother was like brilliantly intelligent academically, right? She went to multiple schools when she was growing up, where she got scholarships in every school that she went to. But my dad wasn't, right? So my dad, in fact, the reason why my dad did well financially and kind of academically, or did reasonably well academically, he didn't actually do that well, was because he had an incident where when he was growing up, I think he must have been like 20, 21, and he was basically the way the exams were marked. Well, sorry, the exam result came out. It came out in a newspaper. So one of his uncles told him, congratulated him and said, "Well done. You've passed the exam." It must have been a major exam. My father's now passed away, but so he basically. So my father was really, massively overjoyed about getting his pass. And then he couldn't find his name in the pass list. So he came back to the uncle and said, where is it? Where's my name? I can't see it. You said I've passed. You're congratulating me. And the uncle kind of replied back and laughed at him and said, you think that you could pass an exam? And he laughed at him and kind of like, it was one of the most insulting things my dad ever experienced. It was like, he basically, and that he says that one thing really drove him to kind of like start doing well academically. He was not naturally gifted. He wasn't like some high-flying student. He became I don't think he did particularly well, but he became a good student, probably a good student, because he was so motivated by that uncle who absolutely ripped it out of him. And so, to think that me and my siblings are the result of some genetic brilliance is just probably not the case. I believe that it really comes down to my mother, really. We had tutors early on. My mother did she did all this research. Even though she kind of didn't know the UK education system, she kind of researched it as well as she could. There was no internet back then. But really, it was her drive, and she did her very best. She pushed to get us into the best schools. We went through, there was a lot of stuff that, there's a lot of things hidden behind the scenes that other kids wouldn't see. My sister, her kids have got into the best schools in the UK, amongst the best schools in the UK. It's not something that they just went into the best schools. There's a whole, basically, I've got to take off my hats off to my sister. She basically, what she did with her two daughters was just incredible. And this is what drives success. Whether you're homeschooled or whether you go to school, ultimately, I think the mother's influence is something so important. And the reason I'm saying this is to kind of and I think that usually comes from mothers who have done well academically. So you might say, well, that's the reason why the kids do well, because the mother's intelligent and said therefore the kids are intelligent. Well, you know what? I guess we could debate this all day. I'm pretty confident it's down to the fact that the mothers really drive their children. And I tell you, it's kind of like this is ultimate. I'm saying this to kind of like almost, a lot of people want a lot of parents want their kids to do really well. Especially, so I guess I'm a father, right? So I can see fathers who are frustrated that their kids are not doing as well as they could be, right? And I think ultimately they're usually fighting an uphill battle, especially if they're out working all day, because they determined how well their kids were going to do when they chose their life partner, their wife, right? And I think that really determines it. And I guess for someone who's young, looking to get married, I think I just say, maybe that should be a factor that you consider if that's going to be important to you. But really, I guess the reason I'm saying this is for mothers to realize the massive kind of influence that you have. And a lot of, I think the worst, I think I should say it, but I think the worst kind of, I wouldn't say the worst mothers, but I think the worst attitude that a lot of parents have is and I think there's nothing worse than this, is they just dismiss their kids as stupid, right? Now, okay, I know there are kids that are really quite, that aren't intelligent. I realize that. I mean, I'm very lucky that I believe that all my kids are at least quite intelligent. I genuinely don't think to this day that my kids are super intelligent. I'm not a stupid guy myself, right? I know, I live with my kids. I know my kids, right? And I'm not kind of making this up. I genuinely don't think that, but I think that's part of the attitude, because I mean, okay, there was this one of the so someone in my family was not doing particularly well in his or her exams. Someone well beyond the age of 15, let's say. My sister and myself were discussing this person in detail, and not once. And he was kind of like, borderline failing exams and whatever. And so we were talking about this kid and talking to this kid and giving him advice or her advice or whatever. But basically, not once did we discuss whether this child was intelligent enough or not. So my sister and myself having a discussion, how can he do well in his exams? And the discussion wasn't, okay, is this guy intelligent enough or not, right? It's, what is he doing wrong, right? And I think that's also to do with this, like, I don't know if you should Google this, growth mindset or something like that, the growth mindset. So, and I'm a firm believer in this because I've kind of lived it myself, which is that if you believe your intelligence is fixed, you're just gonna have a defeatist attitude. And if you believe your intelligence is variable, i.e. you can change it, then you'll work hard at changing it. And I think that's what I think mothers, these tiger mums, whether they're from China, India, or wherever, anywhere else, they have this belief that their kids can do well. And they're not like, they don't just give up very easily and say, oh, well, my child is stupid. Yeah, okay, got it. Some children are really quite far behind. But let me give you one example. This is a true story, believe it or not, and I've written about it online before, and a lot of people don't believe it. Okay, so if you don't believe it, you don't believe it. But there was a guy who I used to teach. A guy whose both parents were illiterate. Now you're talking about, you think genetic advantages, whatever case. Both parents were illiterate. The father used to work at our house, and he He basically, his father asked me to teach him maths. He was about 15 years old. Came to my house. I essentially. I didn't teach him. I was like, I can't remember what, I was probably working by then. His father said, please help me out. Kid went to a very basic, very poor state school in London. He could not multiply two numbers. And I kind of told him, look, I told him the realities of life, as it were, told him where he was heading. And I told him that, look, unless he sorts his life out, he's going to be cooking burgers for the rest of his life. And I told him there's nothing wrong with cooking burgers, but I just wanted to make sure he understood what it meant. He would be cooking burgers for 50, 60 years, explain to him if his boss kind of gave him a slap, he'd probably have to just live with it and carry on. Anyway, so he suddenly, whether I should have done that or not, you can argue with me, but I think I did the right thing, especially because he suddenly became motivated. At the age of 15, could not multiply two numbers without a calculator, right? He was not good at any subject, two illiterate parents, right? And look, he'd never studied, so he wasn't picking things up very quickly. He basically started working like, I wasn't there, but I think he must have started working really, really hard, right? He did his exams 4 months later, 4 months from when I started speaking to him, kind of did GCSE equivalents, got Bs, and then basically, I think he must have been slightly lucky, ended up going to King's College London to do computer science. King's College London, it's a top 50 in the world, roughly, I think, university, to do computer science. So if this kid who's got two illiterate parents, wasn't picking things up, hadn't studied all his life, can do that. I can't see why most kids can't. Really, I was teaching. In fact, I know someone else. And I've got to be a bit vague here. I know someone else who I have taught, myself, who I've taught, not particularly bright, right? Definitely not. I wouldn't say stupid, but not particularly bright. And I've, very demanding parents. Was it a good thing or bad thing? I don't know, right? Because it's worked out well for him, doing phenomenally well today. Went to one of the best universities in the entire planet, like in the world, like top 5 in the world, right? And has done phenomenally well. And his parents were I used to feel sorry for the guy. I really did. I used to think that, he's maybe going to rebel against his parents. He didn't. Everything's cool. He's probably very grateful now to his parents. But, I mean, look, the people I hang around with generally go to the best universities, the best colleges, do really well. I kind of like, I'm surrounded by people like this. And I'm just telling you, we all know there's a system, and you've got to get around the system and work against the system. People like, who do well don't believe that we are kind of like, I remember one friend of mine whose father passed away, an English guy at school. And, I think, really good, really, 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 really nice guy. If he's watching this, I think he might work out who he is. I really respect this guy anyway. So basically, he didn't get into Oxford to do physics. He went to, I think, some other university, very good university. And he always said, look, he's not Oxbridge material. That's why he didn't get in. And the reason I got in was Oxbridge material. He didn't have this kind of privileged backgrounds like many of the kids that went to my school. But basically, that's, it's just, I just like... It's, getting into Oxbridge is a lot. It's a lot to do with luck anyway. But it's just like what that person was saying. I just know he's so wrong. Look, I mean, it's. I think you're probably thinking to some extent, hey, my kids have done so well because they're so intelligent, and I'm just kind of talking crap. Well, I mean, I'm not lying. I mean, I don't know if you know. I mean, I guess you can't tell whether I'm lying or not. Look, but my point is that I know, that the reason why my kids have done phenomenally well is essentially because of their mother. And I'm not talking about the genetic advantage that they get. And I think that the reason I'm sending out saying this is because I can see that my YouTube channel is going to blow up very soon. I think there's going to be lots of parents that are going to pull their kids out of school. It's not going to be like a national emergency or anything, but I already know lots of parents who have pulled their kids out of schools and thanked me for it. And I recently spoke to someone who's doing I think the son's doing A-levels at the age of 15, doing very well, like doing amazingly well in sport, like so well, he could potentially become a national squash player. And you kind of like you're hearing about all these amazing successes, but homeschool does fail as well. And I think where it does fail, I think where it does fail is when the parents are a bit chilled out, and I think particularly the mother. And I think that's the big, massive responsibility that mothers are taking on board. And I think that if homeschooling is going to work, there has to be, like, especially when you're defining work as in homeschooling is going to work as it's going to be successful academically, I think it's kind of like there has to be a tiger mum, really, or a tiger dad who's at home and who's really going to influence the kids. Also, another thing is the kids have to agree with it. I think you cannot get. I think one thing I keep stressing is in my videos is that I have, in particular myself, I've treated my kids as adults since the age of like 13, 14. I've told them that, you do what you want. And my wife doesn't quite agree with that, like fully, but I've told them from my side that, look, you are adults. You've gone through puberty. As far as I'm concerned, you're an adult. That's what I believe fundamentally. I don't think there's any 18, suddenly they become an adult and they're responsible. No, I think once you're 13, you're responsible and an adult, and you kind of like can do what you want. And ultimately, the reason I say that is, look, I can't stop any of my children. We were living on the top floor of a really high-rise building. I mean, I can't stop any of my kids just jumping off and killing themselves. I mean, I can't do that, right? I can't stop them. I mean, I wouldn't know about it. And I can't stop them doing lots of things. So my point was I gave them that responsibility. I think it was a good decision. And by the way, another thing I would say is, look, I just want to make sure I stress this point very clearly. That, look, I think the stuff that you learn at school is completely useless, pretty much completely useless. I think, there's lots of alternatives. But I would say that in the world that we live in, one has to, one is strongly advised to get great grades, one is strongly advised to, or I would strongly advise you, if you're taking my advice, to get your kids great grades, because that's what sets them up for life. It's a bit like that guy who went to one of the top universities I mentioned earlier. I mean, he's like really happy. That guy that, the guy that went to King's College, he's doing phenomenally well now, married some really educated lady, which he would have no way kind of been in that league had he not gone to UCL. He would have not met such a kind of like intelligent lady. So what I'm saying is it is transformative, and Yes, I don't think my kids are educated because of their A levels, yeah, and I don't think my kids are good at their subjects necessarily because they're A levels. I don't think I'm educated because of the fact I went to Oxford. I don't think my wife is educated because of the fact she went to Oxford. Educated does not, you don't get it in certificates. It's kind of like it has a lot more broader meaning, right? So you can get, my wife's family is very educated, I'd say. Generally, really, I think educated is more about a passion for learning. So educated people have a passion for learning, they want to learn. And you can get a degree certificate without a passion. I had zero passion, for physics when I graduated. I worked really hard, but only to get that degree certificate. I bummed around for 2 years, first 2 years at university, but then worked really hard. That does not make me educated. Educated is an attitude. My eldest daughter Miriam, who I'm spending the last 2 weeks, I'm going to spend 2 weeks with her here in Jordan. She's educated. She's got this she's desperate to just, her idea of a fun time. Today is Jordan's Independence Day. I said, look, we got to go to the what do you call it, the square, and everyone's going to be there. And she's like, no, she doesn't want to meet people, whatever. She just wants to read Arabic books. That's her view of having a great time, right? That's what she enjoys. That is educated. My son suddenly decides he wants to do a French A-level for fun. That's educated. Going to a museum, learning things, that's educated. I fully appreciate that. So I'm going on and on about A levels and physics, Oxford and whatever. No, they are. I attach zero importance to them in terms of, if someone comes up to me and says, I have a degree from Oxford and in this subject, I don't think they're an expert in it. I think they've barely scratched the surface. And even if they've got a PhD, it doesn't mean that much to me. It doesn't mean much at all. But at the end of the day, it's like a passport. You get two people. One's got a British passport, one's got a Ugandan passport. That person who's got the British passport can go anywhere he wants pretty much in the world. While the person from the Ugandan passport might be better looking, might be more educated, might be blah, 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 richer, etc. But can't go anywhere. And that's all that these degrees and certificates are. And that's why, to some extent, I've kind of really encouraged my kids to go for it. They're just pieces of paper. But sadly, and very sadly, and maybe I'll discuss this in other videos, but very sadly, these pieces of paper, these stupid, yes, absolutely stupid waste of time pieces of paper in the stupid world that we live in, have, the world attaches so much importance to them. And that is why they are worth chasing, even though they are in most, they don't teach you anything that is of any value. Yep, just because you have that certificate that says you got an A star in this subject, or you went to some amazing university, it doesn't mean anything, but it does mean everything at the same time. Anyway, I hope that helps.